Thank you to Transport Events for hosting this event. What I'll do is I'll just go straight ahead and share my screen if we can confirm that you can see that, and hopefully the technology gremlins won't catch up with me because I'm presenting across a slide deck as well. Great. Okay, so like George, I've spent quite a bit of time on customer sites, implementing systems and working with them on how to make as efficient as possible a relatively non-standard operating space, which is mixed cargo. A couple of items that have really been highlighted, and I tried to identify what are commonalities that we see on almost every site when we actually first engage and talk to customers and clients. And I picked out dimension considerations when it comes to the handling of cargo. So obviously, what containers do, they do a great job at being able to create a standard dimension that we have a fair idea of how to plan, and we can plan space and slots and everything within a vessel or on our yard. And the space and the area or the volume is self-contained, which is great. And of course, as soon as we move away from that, the question becomes, how do we manage these dimensions, and how do we also, and who's managing these dimensions? And there's also questions about handling versus charging as well, because of course you have a business to operate, you have operations that need to get the cargo across very quickly, but at the same time you need to ensure that you are charging for these services, these fantastic services that you're providing, and all of those services accurately. And then I'll also talk about a couple of items or a couple of areas where the service complexities creep in, and those are things that when you're looking at systems, not just your IT systems, but your workflow systems and everything, the complexities that creep in, which make it probably a little bit more of a challenge than, say, the container space in a lot of cases. So the first thing that I did want to highlight is whenever I've been on site, I've really, it's become quite apparent that we have different types of clients, different types of customers or entities that we really need to focus on when we're accommodating how we're handling our cargo. And the three main areas that I've picked out were the operations, and obviously the systems and processes that we provide, or that you're providing and that we're working with. Operations is obviously a big one. We want to move cargo quickly and as efficiently as possible. And as George alludes to, systems which reduce button clicks are pre-planned where we can. We have some ideas around projected space and things like that are really, really helpful for us, as well as point of contact systems where you actually push a couple of buttons and it happens immediately in real time. So it's nice and quick and it's nice and efficient. We have our customers that are looking at systems and customer service representatives, our agencies, and of course managements that are really interested in the reporting of the data that is occurring, that is being pushed through from operational activity, and making sure that they are getting that data and report on time, whether that be real time, which is so often the expectation. But of course, there are also some retrospective data that we might want to be looking at for lessons learned, or the sheer need that we aren't able to get the data immediately. We need to go back to it and update it in an effective way. And then the third group that we quite often need to accommodate when we're looking at systems is the finance team. And one of the biggest the areas that, of course, we want to really focus on is ensuring that we have eliminated any possibility of revenue leakage. That's really important for us. So obviously, if you've got, say, if we use the simplest form of, say, paper-based systems, you need somebody to write something down. Somebody else needs to be able to, they need to write it accurately. They also need to be able to write it legibly, and they also maybe referring backwards and forwards to sheets up in the office. So you run risk there of actually, not intentionally, but that can happen where you can have things such as revenue leakage. So you need those systems you need systems and processes in place that are efficient for all of those three. I call them customers, internal and external. And you can see here we've got a system in place just with this. On the left side, you see somebody being able to scan. You can see customers, they're providing us with goods to ship across our terminal area, and obviously the idea is that somebody is actually monitoring where their shipment is and how that's placed. And of course, the accountants in the background are actually monitoring all of this, and we're wanting systems that are actually unified enough, or a system that's unified enough to be able to do that. So if I move on to the dimensional considerations, and again, I'm referring to what have we found to be really challenging when we're on site, and that's, in a nutshell, how do I define what it is that I'm moving so that I can actually service all of my customers? And one of the biggest primary differences between containers and mixed cargo is the fact that you may need to handle them from a different unit of measure or from a different dimensional perspective. So as an example, you may be actually running piece counts. So you may have a consignment of steel coil, cold roll coil. They may need to be individually ID'd, and they may be just units of one. But then you might have in your same operating space, you might have steel rebar that you're also landing, and it's not possible to individually identify these items, but you're identifying them by, say, grade or shape or dimensional width or even color, some of the markings that you see. So you need to have systems in place to be able to accommodate not just the single item cold rolled coil, but also the quantity counts of rebar. And you would also want to be able to, in the case of rebar, be able to split it off. So you might want to be storing it in different areas. You need to be able to monitor your inventory so that you know exactly where they are, or with accuracy at any given moment. If we move to the bulk space, whether it's dry bulk or liquid space, with the cold rolled coil or the CRCs, you're looking at quantities and maybe their weights. But with bulk, you're talking about maybe volume or pile weights, which again, the systems that you have in place, you want to be able to accurately measure those items based on the unit of measure that you're using. And then you also need to consider things such as freight ton usage as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that when it comes to especially things like charging. Are you charging based on the volume of storage, or are you charging based on the weight at any given moment? You want a system in place, or you want the calculations to choose that. You want to be able to choose that, and it would be great if you had a system that could do that as well, or the processes in place to be able to do that nice and easily. Encapsulating all of that, we want to make sure that whenever we are handling this cargo, that we have accurate conversions in place. So whether we're using pounds or kgs or cubic meters or liters, we want to ensure that we have accurate conversions within whatever processes that we have. When it comes to handling versus charging, this is where I'm talking about, while we're handling the same commodities and which we're charging our services based on the same commodities, different departments might see that cargo in a different from a different perspective. So as I mentioned, if we had the CRC steel discharge, we might be discharging, the operations of discharging that in metric tons. But the tariff sheets and the accounting rules might actually have, or the finance rules might actually be looking at CRC in terms of metric tons over a certain threshold, and they're accommodating those components in the processes, but still looking at the same type of cargo or the same commodity on site. For pulp paper bales, these are examples that I've seen on site where the bales are actually charged by revenue ton or freight ton. So it really depends on how densely packed that paper is as to whether we're going to charge by weight and or report by weight or by volume. It's not just about invoicing and charging, it's also about reporting as well. And in the case of bulk liquid, some of the questions that are being asked, how are we discharging, or how are we handling this? Are we counting, are our flow meters or are our counts in litres, or are we actually handling them in metric tons? I've seen the same sort of commodity being handled in both. You want to have that flexibility in your system, but you also need to have those conversations up front about how you're handling that when it comes, how you're handling those dimensions within your processes and systems. And the other such challenges that you also encounter when it does come to handling in dimensions is I have seen some scenarios where the actual loading of a truck while you're loading to weight, you may actually be loading a number of units onto a vehicle or onto a truck, but it's actually the operations team that can decide some of those components. So you're not just planning space on the vehicle, you're also planning the number of items that you may be able to load, and then terminating the visit or terminating the load point when there is no more physical cargo that can be loaded onto that truck because it's still within the bounds of safe road rules. It's great to those sorts of challenges are the things that you need to try that I guess are the curveballs that mixed cargo terminals are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and they very much do vary based on location and the services that you're offering. If I move on to service complexities, again, this is something that really crops up quite commonly within operations and tend to be either niche or unique operations that can also, I guess, add to the challenge that we have for mixed cargo terminal operations. And those are the things that sit smack bang in the middle of our terminal, or are the ancillary services that are actually are operating that value adds to the customers that we service, which actually make us a point of difference to our customers and our prospective customers. So examples such as packaging plant services I've seen where you're actually receiving in and managing and storing cargo, but then the requests to reshape or repackage that cargo is some of the services that you offer. The example that I could say is you could have, say, tankers coming in, and you have a packaging plant which is actually filling drums of liquid and chemical commodities, and then the job of your business is to deliver out those repackaged drums with the chemical commodity in them. That's not something that you would traditionally see within a standard or normal terminal operations, but it does exist. You've got other handling services such as your special handling services such as London Metal Exchange requires a certain set of rules. If you are LME accredited, you may need to accommodate those within special services. You have hazardous storage, which when it comes to segregation and warehouse segregation for your break bulk and part commodities, you need to adopt certain rules that you need to ensure that you are clear with both your operations team and your charging team what those rules will be and how they're going to be affected in relation to charging and storage. And there are a few others that I've encountered over the years. Log services, so you might have lumber yards which are grading and reassembling containers. You certainly can't break down logs. You certainly can't break down a container, but you can cut a log in half and charge it differently or grade it out in a different manner. So those are the sorts of services that, while they are great to include, they just add a dimension of complexity which requires you need to ensure that you're aware of what your services are, and our job will be to come in, or has been to come in, to understand those and really work with you and come up with what a standardized process would be for those cargo handling rules that you have, or those services that you're offering. And I certainly use the term standardized process as opposed to standard process. We see a lot of the talk around what's best practice within mixed cargo terminals. It's a very difficult one to quantify, but what we can do, and what we do quite often, is work out what those standardized process rules are for you or with you, and then we use a tool set, as George has pointed out, whether it be N4 or Octopi or Master Terminal. All of those systems have a generic set of rules a common set of rules that we can leverage and probably detail further for our prospective customers, in order to ensure that the three main groups that I was talking about in the beginning, our operations team, our actual paying customers, CSRs, and our finance team, are all able to work and play in the same space with these rules, but the rules are are defined for what their focus and their focus and priority is for handling or processing the cargo that we operate with. And that's the end of my slide set. I'm aware that there are many other challenges that are faced, but I just picked out a couple that I commonly see on all of the sites that I've visited over the last 18 odd years of being in this logistics space.